Good day, everyone. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to our Solve Climate by 2030 webinar titled Climate Action and Just Transition, Connecticut Perspectives. I am Dr. Miriah Russo Kelly, and it is my joy to serve as the moderator for today's session. This webinar is a collaborative effort between Southern Connecticut State University and the University of Connecticut. And it serves as an example of how working together to tackle climate issues is the only path forward, especially now as we emerge in a post-COVID world. Together, our two institutions have the ability to make a difference in our state and beyond by working together to educate a diversity of future climate leaders, support bold and just climate-related research, and engage with broader public audiences in the implementation of the myriad of climate solutions needed to address this massive problem. Here at Southern, we're proud to be considered the first university in North America to declare a climate emergency, thanks in part to my very dedicated and persistent colleagues. And at Uconn, the Uconn at COP program has earned a deserved reputation for providing students with transformative climate change experiences at the international scale. So many people are doing what they can, and the Solve Climate by 2030 initiative is a way for us to all learn about what we are all doing and what we can do better. It's important to note that today's webinar is just one part of a global initiative where presentations like this are being offered in all 50 states and 50 plus countries around the world. I encourage you to check out what others are talking about around the country and globe by going to solveclimateby2030.org. Before I get started in showing the video about our Solve Climate program, I want to thank first my colleagues at Bard College Center for Environmental Policy, Eben Goodstein and David Blockstein. They've organized this event 2 years in a row, and they've really grown it this year into a larger and more international event, which has been spectacular. We also wanted to thank our presidents for their leadership on these topics. Their presence today is a testament to how important this is. And their communication offices have just been fantastic in helping us get the word out. Also, thank you to our esteemed panelists who have just been so supportive and responsive to this effort. It really just shows the dedication to big ideas that we have here in our little state. Also, the students, thank you so much for being leaders among your peers and for being committed to that leadership and participating in events like these. These are spectacular students that we'll be seeing today, and I just absolutely cannot wait to see what the future holds for them. Lastly, to our planning team, colleagues, including Susie Huminski and Stephen Axon of Southern Connecticut State University, and Richard Miller and Patrick McKee of the University of Connecticut. It's been a real joy to bring our sustainability offices together in this collaborative way, and I look forward to our future endeavors together. You can find the agenda for today's event at s.uconn.edu/solveclimateby2030 agenda. You can also find bios of the people you will be seeing and hearing from today at that site. I want to let you all know that this is being recorded and we are currently live streaming on YouTube. And we will have the video available shortly after for additional viewing. This is important because this is all part of the Make Climate class campaign designed to bring climate curriculum using videos like this to classrooms around the country and world. So if you're a teacher, we hope you will share this webinar in your class. If you're a student, we hope you will ask your professors to make climate a class by checking out the curriculum options available for dozens of subjects through the solveclimateby2030.org website. Lastly, we want to hear from you. Please submit up to 3 questions for our state level leaders in Connecticut by going to s.uconn.edu/solveclimateby2030 questions. Though we won't be able to present and discuss all of the questions today, we plan to collect and thematically analyze them to develop a deeper understanding of what audiences' interests are related to climate action and just transitions in Connecticut. And as you can imagine, this is useful and valuable information for us as we seek to integrate broad and diverse ideas into important decision-making around these complex topics. Without further ado, a message from my colleagues at the Bard Center for Environmental Policy.
almost all 50 U.S. states, part of Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 U.S. states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the 2 hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinar's homework for the students and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forwards, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
Great. Now it is my honor to introduce Richard Miller, who's the director of the Office of Sustainability at the University of Connecticut and the Institute of the Environment.
Thank you, Miriah. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce the 16th president of Uconn's 140-year history, Tom Katzeles. I know that so many across the state and throughout Uconn Nation are very excited to hear him talk on this subject, especially emerging from the long pandemic toward a greener recovery. President Katzeles' first semester on the job was fall 2019, when in the midst of an unprecedented climate strike involving nearly 1,000 Uconn students, he pledged to accelerate our 2010 Climate Action Plan toward a carbon neutral campus. To help achieve those aspirations, he wasted no time establishing a sustainability work group comprised of students and faculty, supported by several senior staff and expert consultants. As much as we applauded our president's bold climate action, we also knew it was entirely consistent with the things he had done to advance sustainability in his prior academic leadership positions, including while Dean of Engineering at Duke, and then as Provost at the University of Virginia. During the first 2 years at the helm of Uconn, his top priorities have been not only safely navigating the university through the pandemic, but also promoting education, research, and operating practices that will strengthen Uconn's leadership on sustainability and social justice. For that, we thank him. We're proud that he's here today to lead off our program. Welcome to Uconn's President, Tom Katzeles.
Thank you for that introduction, Rich, and thank you to everyone who's joining us here this morning. I'm especially glad to be here with my colleague from Southern Connecticut State University, President Joseph Bertolino. Welcome, Joseph. And want to thank the team at Southern Connecticut State and our team at Uconn for organizing this event. I'd like to morning, Commissioner Katie Dykes of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Bryan Garcia, CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, and Deputy Commissioner Shante Hanks of the Connecticut Department of Housing. But most of all, I'm glad so many students are participating today. Ultimately, we're looking to you to provide the ideas and solutions that will shape our response to the climate crisis. You know, as Rich mentioned, it was in my first month on the job at Uconn as the new president that a crowd of several hundred students formed outside my office during the global climate strike of 2019. But I was less daunted than I was impressed. And what impressed me the most was the nuanced understanding of the challenge ahead that those students showed and the commitment that they showed to meeting that challenge. Since that time, I've made Uconn's role in addressing the climate crisis a focus of my presidency. And the word crisis I used is apt. This is not something that will happen 10 or 20 or 50 years in the future. It's happening now, and the problem grows more serious every day. On a daily basis, we see the effects of a warming planet, including extended drought with dire consequences for agriculture and subsistence farming and consequent social instability, increased duration and severity of wildfire seasons, particularly striking to me as a California native, dramatic sea level rise with results ranging from regular flooding in previous communities, and severe weather events that are both more common and less predictable than in the past. These disastrous effects of climate change are disproportionately impacting the lives of people in developing nations who have had the least to do with historic carbon emissions that remain in the atmosphere for many decades. So, while Uconn is a sustainability leader among its peers, we've consistently been ranked, for example, as a top 10 sustainable campus, both globally and nationally for the past 10 years. We can never be satisfied with the status quo. Consistent with the theme of this webinar, I want to talk about two major undertakings at Uconn in the last year and a half. The first is I determined we have an obligation to explore setting more ambitious goals. At Uconn, we had already set a goal of carbon neutrality for our campus by 2015. I asked whether we could achieve that instead by 2040, 10 years sooner. Although, given the title of this conference and the national series on 2030, maybe I should be even more ambitious. To plan this transition away from fossil fuels to cleaner and renewable energy sources, I knew we would need input from a wide range of perspectives and stakeholders. So I established the President's Working Group on Sustainability and the Environment. It is comprised of faculty and students and supported by ex officio staff from our facilities planning and sustainability offices. And I'm very pleased to say that after more than a year of meetings and countless hours analyzing different technologies are doing, the working group just yesterday delivered its final report and recommendations to me. So this is very timely. One observation is that change is never easy, and transformation of something as basic to our operations as a source of energy that powers our campus is extremely difficult. It requires tremendous vision and noble aspirations that are grounded in the realities of cost, reliability, and efficiency. In particular, our research enterprise especially depends on those things. But one thing I will say that we've learned from the global pandemic is that even though change causes disruption, we can tolerate a lot more disruption than we probably thought we could have just a year ago. Having now stepped back from the day-to-day operations, the working group has actually charted a more sustainable path forward. That means we're already on our way to achieving a cleaner zero carbon energy future by 2040. I know we can do it. The second climate action I've taken is to work with our provost, Carl Lejwe, and his staff to begin a strategic planning and academic visioning process that will focus on these issues. Considering the full context of our times and what's happening in the world around us, this strategic planning process will be centered on education, research, and outreach to address three cross-cutting and value-based priorities, and they are the global pandemic and wellness, racial and social injustices, environmental impacts, especially the existential threat of climate change. Uconn has already initiated academic courses and programs reflecting these priorities. For example, this semester, Uconn developed and is teaching a virtual pop-up course on climate action with more than 1,000 students enrolled, making it our most popular course this semester. And later this month on Earth Day, April 22nd, the Uconn Reads program will host Amitabh Ghosh, author of The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, for a series of virtual dialogues and webcasts open to the public. In closing, I want to say that Uconn takes great pride in its reputation for being a national and international leader in sustainability, but maintaining that status will require the continued success of our operational practices and transformative academic programs. As president of Uconn, I've made achieving these goals a top priority, and I hope that Uconn can inspire and inform bold climate action at your schools, communities, and organizations throughout Connecticut and beyond. So thank you again for this opportunity to share Uconn's progress and aspirations on these critically important issues. I hope you're inspired by today's program to become the leaders and change makers our world needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Katzeles. A slight change to the agenda. Our colleague, Suzanne Huminski, is unable to join us this morning, and so it is my honor to introduce President Joseph Bertolino. In July 2016, President Joseph Bertolino was named the 12th president of Southern Connecticut State University, a public institution of about 10,000 students in New Haven, Connecticut. A social justice educator for over 25 years, Dr. Bertolino is an author, lecturer, and teacher whose research interests include student immigration with an emphasis on undocumented students and dreamers. He's also been involved in campus community engagement, campus social change, leadership development, and social justice initiatives. In July 2019, he signed a climate emergency declaration by college and university presidents in advance of the September 3rd, 2019 UN Climate Action Summit held in New York City. Welcome, President Bertolino, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Miriah, for the introduction. Greatly appreciated, and sorry that Susie couldn't be with us. I know she's feeling under the weather. I also want to thank President Katzeles, Tom. It's Well, always good to see you. Thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to our continued good work together, particularly post-pandemic. I too would like to thank Commissioner DYKES and Deputy Commissioner Hanks and Bryan Garcia, the CEO of Connecticut Green Bank. Also, thanks to our moderators and those who are joining us from around the world. This is really an exciting day and an exciting webinar throughout the course of the next couple of hours. I'm delighted to offer shared welcome remarks with President Katzeles, and I congratulate Uconn on their fine achievements with climate action and the recognition that they have earned in leading sustainability in higher education. And I want to thank all of you for participating in Solve Climate by 2030, where we'll be engaging in critical conversations about climate change. I can tell you that at Southern Connecticut State University, we strive to conduct ourselves according to 5 pillars: dignity, respect, kindness, compassion, and civility. In working to advance the institution towards becoming a social justice university, we are committed to identifying and addressing systemic barriers to equity, access, and success for all members of our community. And so to this end, we also aspire to embody an ethic of care, which is an active and fundamental appreciation of our connections with each other and with the world around us. In fact, we cannot have an ethic of care for each other unless we take care of the world around us, unless we care for our planet, our climate. The two are inextricably linked. We need to approach climate action together, or we're doing it wrong. As president, I can amplify Southern's message in a unique and important way, but our community makes it happen. And I'm tremendously grateful for your efforts, your energy, your creativity in the progress we have made to date and look to accomplish in the future. If we are to solve climate for 2030, we need to do more, and we need to do it together. The challenges before us are complex, and they are formidable. As you heard earlier, 2 years ago, I signed Southern's Climate Emergency Declaration on behalf of the entire campus community. I did so because more than 200 Southern students joined together and advocated for Southern to make this declaration. I'm proud of our students for their advocacy, and I'm proud that in consultation with the Connecticut State College and University System, the Faculty Senate, our Administrative Faculty Senate, Southern took action. It is now posted publicly on our website and for the entire university community to see, to join, and to sign. And I would like to encourage all Southern students, faculty, and staff to do so. And I invite all of our attendees today to read the declaration on our sustainability website and adapt it for a version of your own. Of course, this declaration is not enough to solve the climate crisis, but it's a start. We need together to declare climate action a priority, an emergency, over and over again, and to act. For many years, Southern has prioritized carbon reduction in operations of our facilities and our fleet. We have completed countless energy efficient improvements ranging from LED light bulbs to automated sensors to variable speed fans and giant heating and air conditioning systems. We've upgraded our building controls to harness computer analytics to tell us how to optimize energy use. We reinvest energy incentives from utilities into additional efficiency projects. We have LEED Gold certified buildings, and I'm proud to say we will break ground on a net zero energy school of business just in a few months. We have saved more than $350,000 in 18 months with our 2 giant solar arrays. We purchase green power, we compost our food scraps in our dining hall, we donate excess food in the community, and we recycle, recycle, and recycle. There is so much that is happening on our campus. with our students, with our colleagues, in their research and in their advocacy. But it's not enough. Even if we were to achieve carbon neutral operations in all of Southern's facilities tomorrow, it's still not enough. Climate science tells us clearly, loudly, and often that we need to do more. So what is more? What is a sustainable university? We need to map this and we need to share it. And as I stated earlier, we need to do this together. No university can define what a sustainable university will need to be in 2030, but we are developing that vision right now. The question at the heart of Southern's climate emergency declaration is, how can we catalyze necessary climate solutions at the scale and pace that science tells us is required? The answer for all of us is to work through our institution's core missions to develop and scale solutions. We recognize that we have a long way to go and that all the answers are not clear. But here's what we as universities do. We educate, we train adults for the workforce, for making responsible decisions as community members in their daily lives. We train teachers and nurses, entrepreneurs, journalists, artists, accountants, and scientists. And our students are doing cutting-edge and forward-thinking research and climate action. For example, 2 graduate students in physics, Catherine Perez and Monica Benitez, are conducting research in Southern's Industry Academic Fellowship on direct air carbon capture to see whether it's feasible to capture carbon dioxide from smokestack emissions through a chemical process. Catherine is a physics teacher at Wilbercross High School here in New Haven. Madison Lazaro, a recent graduate of Southern's computer science program, wrote her thesis on blockchain technologies, potential for secure and accurate climate accounting. In layman's terms, blockchain is the digital platform behind Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. Graduate students in Southern's Blue Economy program, Louis Kroc and Michaela Garland, one of the student moderators for today's event, are establishing the Long Island Sound Ocean Cluster to catalyze collaboration, partnerships, and entrepreneurial ventures, focusing on promoting sustainability in marine systems. The Blue Economy program, currently in its 2nd year, includes annual workshops, events, and a pitch competition themed on coastal and marine economies, and it draws on local and international partnerships to promote sustainability solutions. Higher education is a research engine that can drive sustainability and climate action. Universities are a foundation for interdisciplinary and cross-sector collaboration, community outreach, and partnerships among businesses, industry, and government. We're also mindful of the impact that our facilities have on climate. Colleges and universities, including Southern and Uconn, are essentially small towns and cities all over the world. We are a significant sector of buildings, acreage, jobs, transportation fleets, and productivity. Higher education institutions are testing grounds and learning labs for how sustainable communities can be built. And as we listen and think today about solutions to the climate crisis, let's keep in mind the ethic of care. Peace, justice, and health all involve active engagements with dignity, respect, kindness, compassion, and civility. This is how we live an ethic of care. This is how we take care of one another. And this is how we will move forward on climate solutions together. Now, I'm sure you're all eager to hear from our commissioner, Commissioner DYKES, Mr. Garcia, and Deputy Commissioner Hanks. I'd like to thank all of you again for your participation in today's conversation. Again, I thank Uconn for their partnership, and I thank all of you for your good work as you move forward to help solve climate by 2030. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you so much, President Bertolino. Excellent. So now it is my joy to introduce you to our spectacular students who will be leading the panel discussion and our Q&A session that will follow. First, we have Michaela Garland, who is currently a first-year PhD student in the Department of Geography at the University of Connecticut. And she also received her master's in environmental education from Southern Connecticut State University. Please do join us, Michaela. We also have Sabit Nazir, who is currently a graduate student at the University of Connecticut in the Masters of Energy and Environmental Management program. And he's also getting a Sustainable Environmental Planning and Management certificate from the school. And we have Leanna Morissette, is currently a junior at Southern Connecticut State University, pursuing her bachelor's in environmental systems and sustainability, with a concentration in sustainability science and environmental policy, and a minor in business administration. So thank you, students, for joining us today. And again, thank you for your leadership. And I will turn it over to you to introduce our esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank you to the University of Connecticut, Southern Connecticut State University, and all involved in Connecticut's participation in Solve Climate by 2030. This is an exciting event that I am honored to be a part of. And as a student moderator for today's panel, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist this morning, Commissioner Katie Dykes. Commissioner Katie Dykes is the Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Commissioner Dykes was appointed by Governor Ned Lamont in January 2019, and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is the state agency charged with conserving, improving, and protecting the state's natural resources and environment, providing first-rate outdoor recreation opportunities, and bringing cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy to Connecticut's residents and businesses. Department of Energy and Environment Protection is focused on integrating energy and environmental policies and helping Connecticut to build a sustainable and prosperous 21st century economy. Commissioner Dykes served as the chair of Connecticut's Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, otherwise known as PURA. She was nominated by Governor Daniel P. Malloy to serve as PURA's commissioner on October 27, 2016. Commissioner Dykes previously served as Deputy Commissioner for Energy of Connecticut at Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She has also held that position since March 2012. Commissioner Dykes served as the chair of the board of directors of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from 2014 to 2017. And the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a multi-state effort focused on reducing carbon emissions from electric generating facilities. She also represented Governor Malloy on the board of managers of the New England States Committee on Electricity. Commissioner Dykes joined CT Deep in March 2012 after prior service as Deputy General Counsel for the White House Council on Environmental Quality and as a legal advisor to the General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy. Commissioner Dykes, finally, is also a graduate of Yale College and the Yale Law School. So without further ado, Commissioner Dykes, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me okay. It's terrific to be with everyone today. Thank you so much for this invitation. There is so much for us to do to tackle the climate crisis, and it is incredibly important to have youth engaged, students engaged in this fight. Your generation is going to be living with these consequences longer than anyone else, and it's for your generation that we are working so hard at the department and across the state of Connecticut, and now with federal partners in Washington, to implement programs that are going to reduce carbon emissions and at the same time build our economy, improve the quality of the air that we breathe, and help to reduce some of the impacts of environmental degradation in environmental justice communities in the state. I wanted to just highlight one particular opportunity that we have been laser focused on at Deep and across the Lamont administration this year, and that is the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. We have, whenever we talk about climate, I think it's obviously, it can be really scary to, as we review the science and think about how much we need to accomplish in this decade. It can be really daunting. So it's always important. I love to share some of the good news and some of the progress that we've already achieved. We have, because of our renewable portfolio standard, because of investments in energy efficiency and renewable resources, some of them spearheaded by the Connecticut Green Bank, which you'll hear about in just a moment. We've made great strides in reducing the emissions in our electric grid. But that means that the transportation sector looms as the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our state. And we have made some strides in reducing transportation emissions by providing for through federal fuel economy standards, and that means that our cars and trucks are emitting fewer greenhouse gases per mile that they drive, but we're also driving more. So we have an ambitious target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 45% from 2001 levels by 2030. And we can't get there unless we're able to bend down that curve and really ramp down emissions from our transportation sector. The majority of those transportation emissions come from vehicle traffic, from internal combustion engines burning gasoline or diesel fuel in the cars and trucks that we use to get around. We have proposed this plan called the TCI program that will achieve a 26% reduction in transportation greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade. Really excited about this program. We can't implement it unless we get authority from the legislature to do so. And so Governor Lamont introduced a bill in January to the General Assembly asking our legislators to give the state the authority to implement this program. It's really kind of a simple program. What it does is it requires the polluters to pay for their pollution. In this case, the polluters are those companies that sell gasoline and diesel fuel at wholesale. And then those companies will have to pay for the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon pollution coming from their fuel sales, and that those dollars go to the state. We expect it'll generate about $1 billion in revenue over the coming decade. And what do we do with those dollars? We put them to work cleaning up our air and reducing emissions and providing for a more a safer and a more pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly, and community-friendly modernized transportation system. So this proposal gives us enormous flexibility to drive down emissions in ways that match the needs and the priorities of all of the different types of communities that we have in the state of Connecticut. We can use these dollars to provide for rebates for electric vehicles, whether that's passenger vehicles or school buses or medium and heavy duty trucks. We can use these dollars to invest in electric vehicle charging stations that will end range anxiety all across the state. We can invest these dollars in smarter traffic signals that reduce the amount of time you're idling at a stoplight, in roundabouts that help traffic circulate without having to stop, and again, reduce emissions. We can invest these dollars in providing for lower cost transit service, expanding transit service, especially to underserved communities in our rural areas, as well as shifting our transit buses, those fleets, over to clean electric buses. These are just, in addition, we can use these dollars to invest in bike lanes, in walking paths, in complete streets and transit-oriented development that minimizes the amount of time that people are spending in cars and contributes to better health at the same time. One of the important benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector is that it's going to clean up our air at the same time. Connecticut suffers from some of the worst air quality in the country, partly because the air that's blowing into Connecticut over our western border is already heavily polluted from power plants and vehicle traffic in states to the west of us. But we also are significantly contributing to poor air quality from our transportation sector as well. 67% of the air pollution generated here in the state of Connecticut comes from vehicle traffic. And that air pollution is disproportionately concentrated along our interstate corridors and our major thoroughfares. And so that means that communities of color, communities in our urban environments, urban communities are disproportionately affected by that pollution, leading to much higher levels of asthma and other respiratory illness that is significantly impacting vulnerable communities in our state. So by implementing the Transportation Climate Initiative Program, we'll not only be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we're also going to help improve the health of all of our citizens, and especially citizens living in communities that are overburdened by air pollution. I'm very excited that one of the commitments that we've made in this program is to equity. This program will affect consumer gasoline prices. And so it's important that we make sure that communities that are overburdened by air pollution and underserved by a transportation system are assured that they will see at least 50% of the investment of that $1 billion coming into their communities to help reduce emissions and clean up the air. So we're really excited about this program, but we have a long way to go. The bill passed out of committee last week, and we are hopeful that it will get a majority support through the General Assembly this year. But there's a lot at stake, and you know, I know there's a lot of excitement happening at the federal level right now around climate action, but it's great to be able to join you today to share what we're doing at the state level and what's at stake here in Hartford with the General Assembly this year. As we, you know, if we're able to move this program forward, it will make a huge difference in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our transportation sector. We don't have any time to waste. And I will say that the voices of youth and students are often left out of these debates in the legislature. And so I know it's great to have the opportunity to share with you about this program. And if it's something that you're interested in, you can follow up with us at Dept or our Department of Transportation. We're working collaboratively on this program. And we hope that we'll be able to get lots of support to get this enacted this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Dykes. So if you want to introduce President Garcia.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Dykes, and thank you to the University of Connecticut and Southern Connecticut State University for hosting this event today. President and CEO Bryan Garcia is the President and CEO of Connecticut Green Bank, the nation's first state-level green bank. The green bank model is demonstrating how smarter use of public resources can attract more private investment in the green energy economy, reducing energy burden on households and businesses, creating jobs in local communities, increasing the deployment of clean energy, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions that cause global climate change. With its message of inclusive prosperity, the Green Bank won the Innovations in American Government Award in 2017 for the Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Before joining the Green Bank, Bryan Garcia was program director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. At Yale, Bryan Garcia led efforts to develop a leading global program responsible for preparing environmental leaders for business and society. There, he also co-edited 2 publications, Carbon Finance, Environmental Market Solutions to Climate Change, and Carbon Finance to Investing in Forests for Climate Protection. Prior to Yale, he served as Connecticut's Climate Change Coordinator, where he supported the Governor's Steering Committee on Climate Change. Early in his career, he was a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer specializing in NGO capacity building and environmental education in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Bryan is the co-chair of the Financial Solutions Working Group of the State Energy Efficiency Action Network, on the boards of the Institute for Sustainable Energy at Eastern Connecticut State University, Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, and the co-chair of Sustainable Connecticut. Thank you, Bryan, for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you, Sebet, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. My one bold solution needed to solve climate by 2030 is the issuance by the US government of the Green Liberty Bond, modeled after such a bond created by the Connecticut Green Bank last year in recognition of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. On March 22nd, 1943, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt made a special visit to Connecticut to promote the sale of war bonds alongside the Girl Scouts at the Bushnell Theater in downtown Hartford. The Constitution State was among the leading states in the country with the greatest amount of war bond sales during World War II. From 1941 to 1945, the US government issued war bonds as a way to raise money from Americans to manufacture the resources we needed to defend liberty, patriotism, and democracy in the world against Nazi Germany. $185 billion was raised by investments from over 85 million Americans who bought $5 war savings certificate stamps and war bonds from $25 to $10,000. In today's dollars, that is equivalent to raising over $2.5 trillion in 4 years. Last week, President Biden unveiled a $2.2 trillion green infrastructure plan, the American Jobs Plan. The plan is an investment in America that will create millions of good jobs through the modernization and decarbonization of our nation's infrastructure while protecting it from the impacts of climate change. Within the plan are investments to build a world-class transportation infrastructure by fixing highways, rebuilding bridges, upgrading ports and airports, and modernizing our transit systems, including electrifying vehicles and building a coast-to-coast high-speed railway. Modernizing and decarbonizing our nation's infrastructure and making it more resilient to the impacts of climate change means protecting our land and water resources, helping our wastewater and stormwater systems tackle new contaminants to ensure clean, safe drinking water is a right for all communities. Revitalizing our country's digital infrastructure means building high-speed broadband to reach 100% coverage with low-cost internet service. Re-energizing America's power infrastructure to mobilize investment in cleaner and more affordable renewable sources of energy creates jobs that modernizes how we generate power and delivers clean electricity. Creating a civilian climate corps to put a new diverse generation of Americans to work conserving our public lands and waters, bolstering community resilience, and advancing environmental justice will place good-paying jobs within reach for more Americans. Investing in research and development, revitalizing manufacturing and small businesses, and training Americans for jobs of the future would advance our nation's leadership in critical technologies and innovations around solutions to climate change. Eliminating racial and gender inequities in our society by recognizing that our nation's strength lies within its diversity. We realize America's promise by seizing this opportunity to confront climate change through the modernization and decarbonization of our nation's infrastructure, while at the same time holding up our fellow citizens of color and protecting and investing in our vulnerable communities. Governments throughout history have needed to borrow money to fund military operations to fight wars. The Series E war bonds of the 1940s were government bonds marketed by the United States Department of Treasury, offered as retail investments until 1980, when they were replaced by other savings bonds. Bonds were issued at 75 cents per dollar of face value, maturing in par value in a specified number of years that fluctuated with the interest rate. For example, a $75 zero coupon bond at 2.9% interest was redeemable at $100 10 years later. Today, our local, state, and federal governments could borrow money from the American people to fight the war against climate change by issuing green liberty bonds to provide the necessary funds to invest in the modernization and decarbonization of our nation's infrastructure, making it more resilient to the impacts of climate change, creating well-paying jobs in our communities, and addressing structural racism and environmental injustice in our society. This Earth Day, here in Connecticut, you can purchase a $1,000 Green Liberty Bond to support the deployment of solar power and energy efficiency in homes across our state. Visit our website at www.greenlibertybonds.com. My proposal is to take this example here in Connecticut and create a U.S. government-backed, tax-exempt Green Liberty Bond to raise half of the funds needed to modernize and decarbonize our nation's infrastructure, providing our citizens with an opportunity to invest in our future to combat climate change, just as our grandparents did through war bonds to win World War II. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Garcia. Leanna, would you mind introducing our third and final panelist, Deputy Commissioner Shante Hanks?
Yes, of course. And a big thank you to President Garcia, and thank you for your efforts to aid Connecticut's transition to sustainable alternatives. I am now honored to introduce Deputy Commissioner Hanks. Deputy Commissioner Shante Hanks is a thought leader, educator, community advocate, author, and expert in the field of housing. Her grassroots approach allows her to connect the dots between policy and the pulse of the community. It is due to this passion to serve and commitment to providing safe and quality affordable housing throughout Connecticut that in January of 2019, Commissioner Hanks was appointed Deputy Commissioner to the Connecticut Department of Housing by Governor Lamont. Deputy Commissioner Hanks is responsible for the Department of Housing's National Disaster Recovery and Resiliency programs, in addition to municipal infrastructure projects in the communities affected by Hurricane Sandy. She's the project lead for Resilient Bridgeport. Resilient Bridgeport consists of 2 federally funded coastal flood mitigation and defense projects on the south end of Bridgeport, Connecticut. This is an environmental justice project that includes a road extension, an earthen berm, stormwater park, street elevations, floodwater pump stations, in addition to the implementation of green and gray stormwater and internal drainage management strategies. Deputy Commissioner Hanks, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is now yours.
Good morning. Thank you for such a warm welcome and inviting me to participate in today's program on such a relevant issue. Although there are so many relevant issues being addressed today in 2021, if we expect to make an impact on climate change, we must continue to stay the course, despite a health crisis, social justice unrest, and contrasting political agendas. Let me first say, as an SCSU alumni, I'm so excited to see so many members of Southern Connecticut State University's community as facilitators of this webinar, and that we have such a robust sustainability program. So with that being said, special shout to Dr. Joe and SCSU OWLs participating today. The state of Connecticut was awarded 2 HUD-funded grants for Resilient Bridgeport projects, better known collectively as Resilient Bridgeport, and these projects are overseen by the Department of Housing. Rebuild by Design is a $10 million grant that was awarded to only 3 states, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. And the NDR-FRRP project, which is the National Disaster Resilience Flood Risk Reduction Plan project, is a $56 million grant that was awarded to 13 states and territories. I'm happy to report that despite the health pandemic, we have been able to continue our work on these projects, and over the past year have partnered with our sister agencies, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So I'm also delighted to sit on today's panel with Commissioner DYKES. Connecticut's National Disaster Resilience Program aims to implement the resilience vision developed as part of the competition process of establishing more resilient coastal communities where structures and critical infrastructure in the flood zone are adapted to withstand occasional flooding and protected by healthy buffering ecosystems, where critical services, infrastructure, and transport hubs are located on safer, higher ground, and where strong connections exist between the two. The Department of Housing, again, as said in my introduction, we are the lead agency on the Resilient Bridgeport project, but we could not do this work and make our vision a reality without the help of our sister agencies. As I said, Department of Transportation and Dept, but also DEC's State Historic Preservation Office and the City of Bridgeport. Bridgeport's South End neighborhood experiences chronic flooding conditions resulting from coastal inland flooding, tidal flooding, and regular rainfall events. These projects will protect affordable housing that is within biking and walking distance of the Metro North train station in downtown Bridgeport, critical power infrastructure, historical and cultural resources like the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses, which will be celebrating their 200th anniversary next year, and has been designated to America's 11 most endangered historic places list by National Trust for Historic Preservation. In addition, there are the William D. Bishop Development Cottage Historic District, the University of Bridgeport, and the historic Seaside Park, which is an Olmsted Park. So as we continue to move Resilient Connecticut forward and keep the vision in mind, we have a great opportunity with Resilient Bridgeport, but there are many vulnerable communities along our coastline that also need this help and this attention. With this in mind, what makes Resilient Bridgeport unique, though, is not only the historical landmarks and the institution, but it is also an environmental justice project. 66% of the households in Bridgeport South End earn below $30,000 annually and is primarily a Black and Brown community. Even though these are federally funded projects, these projects would not be possible without the collaboration of the private and public partners. As a result, RBD, Rebuild by Design, will make way for new affordable housing being developed on Bridgeport's Public Housing Authority land. And the FRP project, National Disaster Recovery Project, will provide the dry egress necessary for Bridgeport to build and relocate Bassett High School. In addition, there are multiple waterfront transit-oriented residential developments underway. Finally, I consider myself more of a practitioner and educator due to my background in social science and experience in higher education. I sit amongst scientists in this field, but many have a different perspective, and my perspective allows me to present the information to local communities in a comprehensive way. Let's just say I consider myself a translator of sorts. I also think it's important to articulate how sustainability and climate change affects our day-to-day lives. When we say 500-year flood zone, or when we talk about the effects of sea level rise by 2050, we have to break that down when we talk to members of the local communities, and it explains to them how these concepts affect people's day-to-day lives, or explain how what they do today will impact their grandchildren's lives in the future. I say that to say it's so important that we connect with their values. As Commissioner Dykes mentioned, high rates of asthma in these urban communities with primary Black and Brown populations is one way. And because we know the importance of educating our communities and connecting with students, an additional element of the National Disaster Recovery Project is that we fund a resilience center. This resilience center will be located within the new Mary and Eliza Freeman Center with a goal to serve the South End community and its ongoing commitment to build a resilient Bridgeport. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you to our panelists. So at this time, I think I'd like to invite our students and all three of our panelists to join us on screen. We do have a Q&A session, and the students have prepared questions for our panelists. So I will leave it off to the students, and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank you to all of our panelists. To start off with the questions, the first question is for Commissioner Katie Dykes. And the question reads, what priorities have been identified by the Governor's Council on Climate Change, other than transportation, to address climate change action, adaptation, and mitigation challenges for the next 10 years? And what are the big gaps that need to be filled? And I think it might be, if you don't mind, Commissioner Dykes, if you could provide a little background to the audience on what the Governor's Council on Climate Change is, just very briefly, just in case some of our audience members aren't aware of this Council on Climate Change.
Terrific. Yes. Love talking about the Governor's Council. So this is something actually that was started by Governor Malloy a couple of years ago, and Governor Lamont signed an executive order in September of 2019 that revamped and expanded this Governor's Council. So there are about 24 folks who are members of this council. And it advises the governor on the steps that he should take and the state should take to not only reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, so we can minimize the impacts of climate change, but also to prepare the state to adapt and be more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So what you heard from Deputy Commissioner Hanks, for example, is a great example of that kind of adaptation resilience effort that we need to undertake in the state. So that's another important area. The council has commissioners of various agencies that are participating, as well as members of the private sector, environmental advocates, labor representatives, business representatives. So the intention was to have a real diverse set of stakeholders and voices advising on the steps that we need to take. And the Governor's Council, actually, we had about 7 different working groups that were conducted last year, digging into different parts of our climate agenda. We had, I think, probably over 1,000 pages of recommendations that came from those working groups, and there were dozens and dozens and dozens of people who participated as members of the working group in coming up with amazing recommendations and things we should prioritize. So in January, we delivered to the governor a report of 61 actions, near-term actions that we need to take to prioritize our response to climate change here in the state of Connecticut. The report is available on Dept's website, and it's a great place to take a look because there are so many things that we can do in our individual lives, but especially to the extent that people take a moment and look at this report, it gives you a sense of what your government is committing to do and ways that you can get involved and support some of these different efforts. We can't make the progress that we need to make unless we have everyone involved. And we're really excited about this report that kind of, 61 is not a short list. It's not a short to-do list, but it speaks to the breadth of the climate response that we need to take here in the state. And so I hope folks will go and check it out.
Perfect. Can you also provide just a little detail on, some of the gaps that were addressed in the Governor's Council on Climate Change, and what are the ways in which these gaps can be filled?
Great. Well, one of the most important gaps is equity and environmental justice. We did not, prior to this Governor's Council starting off, we didn't really have a specific focus on equity and environmental justice. But it was central to our work in this council over the last 2 years. And why is that? I think you heard from the various presentations that because of racial injustice, because of wealth inequality, we have, communities in our state are not all going to be experiencing the impacts of climate change equally. And they're what we would refer to as frontline communities, just like what Deputy Commissioner Hanks, referred to, the community there in Bridgeport, in a low-lying area, very flood-prone. That would be an example of, communities that we need to make sure are at the forefront of our response, so that, and the exciting part is that our response to climate change and the investments that we're making as we're really remaking our economy to reduce carbon emissions can be an engine of addressing inequality. And so that's an example of with the Transportation Climate Initiative program that I talked about. It's a program that will reduce emissions, but also investing $500 million over a decade in cleaner transportation solutions for overburdened communities. That's an example of how our response to climate change can address inequality and environmental injustices that are occurring in our state. So that, I think, is a really important gap that we've had in our various climate strategies in years past that we're working very intentionally to improve upon. And it's a dialogue. You know, we are not there. We are not where we want to be yet, but we are. The only way that we can make progress on having an equitable and inclusive approach to climate change is by setting out that intention that equity and environmental justice will be at the forefront, and making sure that we are engaging with communities and letting them know, you know, what's happening with climate change, and engaging them in the solutions we should be prioritizing.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dykes. It's really great to hear that the environmental justice and the racial inequalities are being, a great initiative moving forward in the Governor's Council on Climate Change. But now I'm going to turn it over to Sabit, as he has a question for President Garcia.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Commissioner Dykes, for your answer. I have a question for President and CEO Bryan Garcia. What more can you tell us about the upcoming Green Liberty Bonds insurance here in Connecticut? And what does that mean for an average ratepayer?
Thank you for the question, Sabit. Earth Day, stay tuned, April 22nd, for the release of the Green Liberty Bonds. I can't give too much detail because the preliminary offering statement, I'm watching my emails right now, are being cleared up now, and they will be posted later on this week. So for the audience out there who's interested, take a look at greenlibertybonds.com, sign up, you'll get information directly from it. But what I can do is speak to last year's issuance, which is very likely that this year's issuance will follow. So last year's issuance was to support $16 to $17 million of bonds, whose proceeds would be used to support the deployment of solar power and energy efficiency across the state of Connecticut. So we designed the Green Liberty Bond in honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And what that is there are essentially three elements to a Green Liberty Bond. Our audience out there probably has heard of green bonds, and there are standards for how to designate a bond a green bond. But what we're creating is a subset of a green bond. So what we're saying is, to be a Green Liberty Bond, and anybody can do this who's issuing a bond, is you have to have three things. First, the use of proceeds must go to supporting the Paris Agreement. So the proceeds of the bond have to go to supporting mitigation efforts, adaptation efforts, which are the two key pillars of the Paris Agreement. Our use of proceeds last year was to support solar power and energy efficiency. The second is that the bonds have to be issued in no less than $1,000 denominations, or $1,000 denomination maximums. We're trying to lower that denomination value so that bonds can become more accessible and affordable to all citizens. Right now, these bond markets operate for Wall Street, institutional investors, pension funds, and each bond would be $5,000, and these institutional investors will buy millions of these bonds. So what we want to do is to lower that denomination value to make a bond more accessible and affordable to the citizens of the state of Connecticut and people across the country. I can tell you last year, we sold out. We had people across the country interested in investing in Connecticut that we couldn't satisfy with our bonds. So the second thing is that the denomination value has to be $1,000 or less. The third piece of it is that because we want citizens to buy the bonds, they have to be certified. These are retail investors, meaning we need to ensure that the bond use of proceeds are meeting a standard so that citizens who are buying them recognize that the proceeds are being used for their intended purpose. So the Climate Bonds Initiative is the certifier of our bonds. So if you do those three things, then anybody can issue a Green Liberty Bond. So stay tuned. Later on this week, sign on to www.greenlibertybonds.com. And in terms of the use of proceeds, So in Connecticut, we have a 350 megawatt solar PV target for residential homeowners in our state. And to follow on Commissioner Dyke's point, we realize over time that the clean energy economy that we're creating needs to lift everyone up. So I loved what the president said, President Bertolino, in an ethic of care. We need to ensure that our policies have an ethic of care. And in the case of solar PV in Connecticut, Connecticut is known as a solar with justice state, which essentially means that households are demanding solar PV, low to moderate income families in communities of color are proportionately demanding solar PV at the same level or more than non-LMI families or white communities. We made it a very intentional effort back in 2015 to ensure that this technology is available to vulnerable communities. And what we see as a result is a reduction in energy burden. Energy burden is the percent of household income spent on energy. We can actually reduce that spend by helping those households deploy solar and energy efficiency. So these bonds are going to support the deployment of solar power and energy efficiency in our state looking ahead. And the bond can do other things, but that's what we're looking to do this Earth Day.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Leanna, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask Deputy Commissioner Shante Hanks a specific question.
Thank you. And thank you to President Garcia for your efficient answer on the issuance of bonds here in Connecticut. For Commissioner Hanks, what do you think our universities can do to better support just transitions in communities like Bridgeport?
Commissioner Hanks, I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah?
we can. Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Darn, what I said was so amazing, though. It was so profound, and you missed it. No, I started to say was thank you for that question, Leanna, because as I was looking at the folks that I'd be serving on this panel today, I started thinking I need to speak to someone about grabbing some of those interns that are working on environmental justice projects today at both Uconn and Southern. We would love to have you participate in our project. We have a end date for both of those projects, September 2023. And we just recently were given an extension by an act of Congress at the end of the 11th hour of the last congressional session. So we're excited about that because we really want to be able to fully complete these projects. And although I did mention that we haven't had setbacks for the most part as a result of the pandemic, of course, there have been some. So with that being said, back to your question, you know, we've been talking about environmental justice and social injustices and racial inequities. Those are all very important topics. And when you can marry those two, kind of dovetail them with climate change, that's when you have a great combination there and a way to connect with your communities. And in particular with young people, because as we know, most campaigns that have done really well over the years, it's because you've connected with young people first in the schools. I remember when I was young, the whole anti-smoking thing, for example, they figured, let's get to the students, to the children, and then they'll go home and talk to their parents, right? Car companies, when they want to get mom and dad to buy a new car, in particular a minivan, they started appealing to the children. What are the amenities they want in the car? So I think it's the same thing that we must do. I'm really excited to see so many college students involved, right? These programs that the state universities have established, in particular my alma mater. But I'd like to see this incorporated into the grade school curriculum. I think that's vitally important, and students would understand. I remember the first time I had an asthma attack, I was 5 years old. So if you told me in kindergarten or first grade that the kind of car my parents are driving or the practices, you know, our day-to-day practices could have a positive impact on my health, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to listen and get my parents to do the same. So I think that my answer would be to connect with young people. And that's what we're doing. What our goal is to do with the Resilience Center inside of the Mary and Eliza Freeman homes. There's this wonderful new design that they're working on where there'll be a residential aspect of it, but primarily the lion's share of that property will be a community center. And within that community center will be a resilience center. And the goal is to be able to, when the world is back basically the way we know it, where students can come visit this location, almost like a museum in a sense. And, you know, in case it doesn't, go back to that way in which you can physically come, we can definitely do it electronically. We'll figure that out. We know the importance of adapting to a situation. But I guess that's my response in short, because we can't afford to let this continue to be a you know, secondary, tertiary issue. This is a primary issue that's impacting all of our day-to-day lives.
Thank you,
Thank you
Commissioner.
so much, Deputy Commissioner Hanks. I would have to agree with, sorry, Leanna. I would have to agree with you that, you know, it's very important to develop this pipeline directly at starting with grade school and getting students to, you know, really enjoy and recognize that climate change is an issue and there are solutions and that we can work towards it. But getting down to that young age is extremely important, and I think is something that we need to strive for as well. I would like now to open this question to all the panelists. And this question is coming from our audience. It is a live question that was submitted. And it says, given that climate change is an existential threat, how do people and communities avoid feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness about our individual impacts? And how can we come together to work collectively?
Well, I'm so glad that someone raised that question, because it's really important to talk about the impact of, you know, climate change, not just on our infrastructure and on our communities and our environment, but on our mental health. It's really, really important to talk about. I mean, these can be kind of scary and unsettling things to hear about. Especially for young people. So the number one thing, first and foremost, is to talk about it. That's really, really important, because chances are there are other people that have felt the same way. In fact, I am one of those people. Sometimes I get really discouraged about this. You know, you read the science and it's like, you know, how much change is going to be required. And sometimes it can feel really daunting, and that can be tough. The thing that helps me the most is taking action. That fact that I can get up in the morning and do a webinar like this, go talk to legislators. I'm doing an event later today with the Lieutenant Governor to talk about the TCI program that I'm hearing more and more. I've been working for the state for about 10 years and working on climate issues. And I've only in the last couple of years, you know, you've really seen this significant increase in the number of people are paying attention to this issue, especially young people. And so it's kind of like, is it that Mr. Rogers, you know, phrase of like, look for the helpers, right? And so that's what really gives me a lot of great positivity and hope and optimism is seeing how many people are getting engaged, not overwhelmed, but engaged. Sometimes, you know, you have that experience, you know, you may have people in your family or in your community who just don't think that climate change is happening, or want to debate about it on social media. But I think my focus is always, you know, don't worry about debating with those folks. Look at the other folks who may not know about what's going on with climate change and how you can engage with them and talk with them about opportunities that they can do to help enhance resilience and reduce emissions. Sometimes the thing that will get someone really motivated to work on climate change isn't greenhouse gases, by the way. It may be air quality. You know, when we talk about the TCI program, we have 6,000 school buses, diesel school buses in the state of Connecticut. And if we get this program, if we get this bill passed this session, we would have funding enough to be able to switch all of them over to electric school buses, which would mean think about it, we're putting our youngest, most vulnerable people, our children whose lungs are still developing, in diesel emitting school buses. You don't have to be someone who's reading all the latest IPCC reports about climate change to care deeply about having cleaner air for your kids or for your school. And so that's the other exciting thing about climate change, is that the solutions that we're advancing to address it are things that can appeal to lots of different people for lots of different reasons. And so I think those are things that, help a lot to not feel, despairing and hopeless, but like get a lot of positivity out of taking action. And especially, I think the last thing I would say is seeing young people getting involved in politics and in the political process. You have no idea the power of your voice. And these processes are not always set up to make it easy for you to figure out how to use that voice. But we are seeing so much change and so much more attention being paid by policymakers to addressing climate change because young people are getting involved. And that is another thing that gives me a lot of optimism and hope.
That is great. Just following on Commissioner Dykes' remarks, yeah, get involved and take action. There are things we know we can do at home. There are things that we heard earlier that your institutions are doing. So things that we know our colleges and universities can do, our workplaces can do. But there are also things that you can do in your community. Here in Connecticut, we have a Sustainable Connecticut program. If you aren't familiar with it and your community has yet to become a registered Sustainable Connecticut town, take a look at it, sustainablecT.com. They also have a community matching grant program that literally supports local projects, equity murals, local community supported agriculture, you name it, bee pollinating, any sort of thing that you want to do locally to engage citizens. They will support through a matching grant program. It's really incredible to watch the citizens be creative within their communities. De Tocqueville wrote about democracy in America and focused on New England for a purpose, right? I think what we see here in New England is a very active citizenry. So as Commissioner Dykes said, get involved in politics, get involved in your community, because it is through you that new ideas will be created and we will address this problem.
Great, thank you so much. I believe we may have lost Deputy Commissioner Hanks.
Yes,
So Sabi, I will.
she had to leave a little bit early, but I think there are a few other questions. I mean, we probably have time for maybe one more. Sabit?
Sure, Sabi.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sabit, do you want to?
Sure. So as we know, as Commissioner Dykes and President Garcia mentioned, a lot of students' voices, they're very huge nowadays in terms of activism and creating change. So my question would be, many students might not feel that they have a voice, but what can students do to help in the effort to solve climate by 2030?
So I think one of the really important things to start off is just getting training, looking for opportunities to get some training in how to engage in the legislative process or engage, with the executive branch. We don't want to put this is not it's not hard to do, but it's not something that everyone would automatically know about. So I think that's something to start with. But writing a letter or sending an email, calling up, phone calls, to a legislator, to your first selectman, to your administration at your college, thinking about all the different communities that you live within, right? And all of the different people who are making decisions on your behalf every day. When you take the time to pick up the phone and call, or send an email. I get emails, I get calls, and it matters. It really makes you think, okay, somebody out there cares, somebody out there is listening. I think so that's one that's really important, especially during the legislative session. Right now, as I mentioned, we have the Transportation Climate Initiative program bill. We have a legislation that is proposed to guarantee that Connecticut reaches 100% zero emission electric supply by 2040. We're proposing legislation that would require all landlords to provide all utility bill data, so you can find out how much it'll cost to heat and cool your home, your apartment, or your home if you're renting. Something that a lot of people don't know about, but it's a big driver for people to make investments in energy efficiency. We have a lot of things that are going on in the legislative session, and you may not know about all of that just from reading the paper. So I think that's an important place to get involved. So few people actually call and email and get involved that when you do, especially at the local level, it has a really outsized effect. The other thing I would say that's really important is find allies. It's pretty rare, that we get a major piece of, legislation or an important new tool to fight climate change just based on environmental groups, let's say, advocating for it. Some of the most groundbreaking and impactful policies that we've been able to get adopted have been because we had lots of different stakeholders who are working together. So for example, in 2019, the legislature gave us the authority to purchase 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind, emission-free renewable resources. And with that, we've contracted for enough offshore wind now that it will supply 20% of our electricity here in Connecticut by 2025. And that was because of legislation that was supported by labor unions who see a real opportunity for them to get employed building and constructing these massive turbines that are going to be the size of the Chrysler building. Community leaders who want to bring economic development to their towns where they have deep water ports. Business groups, renewable developers, as well as electric utilities and environmental groups. So there's a whole coalition of folks really pushing for that piece of legislation, and it made a big difference. So I think that's the other thing is find allies and compare priorities and work together. That makes a huge difference.
And so that you all are doing it, right? I mean, there are elements. I mean, to hear President Katzeles talk about one of his key priorities being addressing climate change, like that is really unique, right? When you hear a leader, and the same thing with President Bertolino, right? I mean, to see your academic institutions, that happens because the students are expressing the importance of the issue, not only advocating it from a societal perspective and a global perspective, but also why it's important to study, research it, and do all the things that universities do. So continue to do that. And then just, what Commissioner DYKES is saying is you got get out there and advocate. You all are like the social media generation. You all do things so efficiently, like you can mobilize thousands of people like that. Like it would have taken me and my generation like a long time to organize, but you all do it so effectively. And I say, so the bills that the commissioner raised, bring support to those bills, TCI, 100% clean energy by 2040, all those things that the commissioner was talking about, bring that to Hartford, right? Like that is one way that you can take what you're learning in the classroom, the passion you're feeling in your hearts, to use democracy to implementing the things that you want to see. And then just lastly, what you've heard from the commissioners and and the presidents is a recognition that climate is going to have a disproportionate impact on a lot of people. So people in our vulnerable communities are going to need help. So to the extent you all can study it, research it, understand it, figure out new ways to address more investment in those communities, helping vulnerable communities, getting involved, volunteering, that is going to help. We need to help our vulnerable communities because we know climate change is around us. And as it continues to hit us, we need to ensure that those vulnerable communities are able to bounce back quicker and get back to their life and supporting their family. So I really encourage you all to put on your ethic of care hat that President Bertolino said, and get out there and show your heart, because if we support each other, and address humanity, we are going to fundamentally address our environmental problems. So care for each other and get out there.
Thank you both.
all so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know President Bertolino had to leave a little bit early, and Deputy Commissioner Shante Hanks did have to leave a little bit early, but I think as we close here, I would invite everyone who's on our call to come on screen. And I just want to offer my thanks again to our presidents, to our panel, and to our planning committee, and especially to our students. And thank you so much for your leadership, everyone. I look forward to more events like this and more initiatives where we can all collaborate together to address these issues that are so pressing. So thank you all for joining us today. And for those of you who are watching out there, please do submit your questions to us, even though we weren't able to get to them today. We will be taking all of those questions and trying to make sense of them so we can really guide our path forward towards climate action and just transitions. And thank you all for joining, and take care.
Thank you for having us.